You're listening to Business Stories with Ryan Arcaracci, where I speak to business professionals from all walks of life. Thanks for listening, and let's get to it. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Business Stories podcast with Ryan Arcaracci, and I'm a comedy fan, and I was excited when Joe Stapleton decided to join the podcast and come on and talk about the comedy world, comedy business, and poker. I'm also a fan of poker, so this is an exciting episode. I'm going to learn so much talking to Joe. So, Joe, thank you for being here. This is really great.
I'm so flattered you think I'm in the comedy world. That's like one of the nicest things that anyone has ever said to me. You have to understand that I feel very much like an outsider in the comedy world. I'm one of those people who skates by on not working very hard at comedy.
Yeah.
Now, skate by is a relative term. There are plenty of people out there talking to you, my haters, who think that I'm not skating by and that I am a failed comedian. But yes, I am an interesting sort of case in the comedy world. My career is not typical in that I already had the job on TV.
Yeah.
And then I started doing comedy, and it's actually my relatively comfortable day job that prevents me from being able to do more comedy, of which one of the goals of doing comedy would be to end up having the job that I have, right?
Yeah.
Like if you take any grinder open micer to like the occasional feature comedian guy and said to them, hey, would one of your life's goals to be like doing poker commentary on TV, to be the funny poker commentary guy? And they'd be like, yeah, of course. Like that's one of the better final destinations for a stand-up comedian, realistic at the very least. So for me to have done it backwards is weird, because I'll show up to places where I feel like fraud because all the other people are real comedians. And some of them are like, what are you doing here? Don't you already have a TV show? And I'm like, yes, I know, but this comedy show I'm on tonight is way above my pay grade in the comedy world.
Yeah. What drew you to want to do comedy? Because I read you grew up around Boston and then you moved to LA to pursue comedy. Was that something you thought about as a kid? Were you kind of like, did you get that bug as a kid to kind of want to get into comedy?
I grew up in upstate New York, just for the record. I don't want Boston people to beat me up, but I did go to college in Boston. So, it's all similar sort of vibes and areas. I just, even later when you tell me that I was a writer for Mad TV, I'm going to go, I wasn't a writer for Mad TV. I worked on Mad TV and was also trying to write comedy, because I just like to make sure that I'm not like stealing someone's valor for living in Boston. Okay. So, but what happened was, and this is without getting into the psychology of it, but this is an apropos story, given that it's the 50th anniversary of Saturday Night Live, and it's been all over social media and all over everything else, is that I wasn't allowed to have a television in my room when I was growing up.
Really?
Nope. And I wasn't allowed to watch television before or after school, right? So when most kids were watching television, I wasn't allowed. I was allowed to watch PBS. Anyway, I digress. I wasn't allowed to watch television, but at my grandmother's house, there was a television in the bedroom where she would have her grandchildren stay when they came to visit. And so I wanted to go to my grandmother's house every weekend because there was a TV and I could watch television at nighttime. And it just so happened that one night I was flipping through the 4 channels that we had, and I came across a child on television doing sketch comedy at 11:30 at night. And it just so happened to be Saturday Night Live, and it just so happened to be the episode where Macaulay Culkin was hosting. So I thought there was a TV show for children on at 11:30 at night, and I fell in love with Saturday Night Live that night. I remember not all, but some of the sketches to this day. I remember Macaulay Culkin sitting in a bathtub with Mike Myers, and Mike Myers had this recurring character called Simon, turns out.
Yep.
And just being mind blown that this was something that was clearly for adults, but like it was puerile enough. I don't know if that's the right word. Immature enough
Yeah.
that it still spoke to a kid, and I fell in love with Saturday Night Live that night. I think my love of comedy in general comes from the fact that, like, with my parents' attention, you never knew what you were going to get. They could be in a good mood or a bad mood. And I just quickly learned that I'm not going to take a chance on what mood you're in.
Yeah.
If I'm funny and I entertain you, I can sort of hedge my bets a little bit and not worry, and maybe just sort of get some extra credit. And that's something that's applied to everything forever for me. And it's kind of a gamble, right? Some people don't want to be joked with right away. I'm one of them, actually.
Yeah.
I don't mind when someone's funny. When someone tries to be too funny with me right off the bat, I'm like, whoa, hold your horses, pal. Let's just get to know each other a little bit. So, but
Right.
yeah, I think on a psychological level, it just came from, wanting, like most things, just wanting my parents' attention and wanting it to be positive attention.
Interesting. Interesting. So can you talk about like early shows you've done? Like how do you approach going into a comedy club? What's your writing style? Are you drawing stuff from just everyday life, from your past, from past experiences? Where do you extract the creativity from?
Sure. For the most part, it is just generally things that I think are funny or things that are incongruous about the world. Like,
Yeah.
you say hypocrisy, and I'm not just talking about political or personal, but like just normal everyday hypocrisy is something that I'm like, oh, that's something that's worth complaining about. And I think a lot of comedy is complaining. So I
Yeah.
think that I try to find worthwhile things to complain about. But what I was doing, to your question, was that I was drawing on things from life, but instead of like just saying, here's something that happened to me and how I feel about it, knowing the audience would probably feel the same way, I didn't have that confidence for a really long time. So instead of saying, here's my experience, I'll just say, don't you hate it when you
Hmm.
do this
Yeah.
or when this happens in the world? And I was trying to like zoom out on
Yeah.
a lot of this stuff and make it more relatable. And then within the last few years, I got a really solid piece of advice, was like, no, man, go back to your own personal experience complaining about that thing and trust that the audience actually knows what you're talking about, because you wouldn't be doing this as a bit if you didn't think it's relatable, right?
Yeah.
Right. So instead of trying to crowbar it and make it one size fits all, make it your own size. And I'm still in the process of undoing all of that, and trying to make it more personal. But the advice came from Michael Ian Black, who saw my show in Scotland. And I was like, oh my goodness, you're one of my all time favorites. Like, I don't mean to, gosh, but you're a hero of mine. Like, do you have any notes for me? And Michael's a poker fan.
Hmm.
And he's like, well, you have one of those interesting jobs in the world, and you didn't talk about it even once on stage. And I was like, well, it's because like I think it just requires a lot of context to understand what I do, and also I think that people, they when they see stand up comedy, they don't want the comedy is struggle. It's the struggle is what's funny. Like,
Yeah.
they don't want to hear about someone, they don't hear about success.
Yeah.
And Michael just looks at me and he says, Joe, you're not that successful. And so, and
Yeah.
he was right. Not only was he right, but also it was an incredible angle into that whole thing. So now I do talk a lot about being a poker commentator. And what do I focus on? How hard it is to contextualize
Yeah.
and how not very successful I am. And even though there's not a single other poker commentator in the room, I didn't think this material would be relatable. It is. It is, because people can relate to, I don't make as much money as I think I should.
Yeah.
And my job is weird and hard to describe. I think those are things that like a lot of people can understand, even if that's not their job.
Yeah. How do you handle, I mean, I know comedy, well, like poker is a grind, right? You're going to be playing or performing and it's not always going to be great. But there has to be, to me as a comedian, you have to be able to handle mentally those bad shows, just like a bad beat, right? You've got to handle it. And it's so weird that there's a similarity there. But what do you do to handle the difficult shows or a joke that doesn't hit or just a bad crowd? I mean, you've got to have something mentally you do to keep pushing forward during that uncomfortable moment, right?
So there are more similarities between poker and comedy than you. I'll blow your mind right now. There's
Yeah.
like five other ones that we can focus on after this if you want. I don't want to go too far. The one I usually start with is that your friends are your competition.
Yeah.
And when something good happens to one of them, you don't hate it, but you're like, that should have been me.
Right.
And so to the point that you are asking about, it even goes one level deeper into the poker metaphor because yes, of course, you have to learn to pick yourself back up, whether it's a bad beat or whether you made a mistake, right? You still have to say, what can I learn from this?
Yeah.
How can I not make this mistake in the past? And if this is purely luck, then I need to keep putting myself in this exact same situation over and over. And statistically, if the bad luck will be dwarfed by the good luck or the just statistics of it, right?
Yeah.
If I'm the best comedian in the room, I'm going to get the most laughs most of the time. But a lot like poker, people might think that they're getting unlucky when really they are making some mistakes. So
Hmm.
if you're consistently not winning, just like comedy and poker, it's hard to know if me treading water here is it because I'm lacking in luck or is it because I'm lacking in skill?
Hmm.
It's really difficult to know. It takes a large sample size and it takes some deep reflection. Again, same as in poker, right? You really have to dig down deep and see why it is that you're messing up.
Yeah.
Another similarity between, at least in this particular thing of having to pick yourself and put yourself back down, that I am not sure where I lie right now, is I almost never bomb. I almost never bomb. I do just okay, like
Yeah.
a big percentage of the time, and I kill sometimes, but I bomb like once or twice, once every 2 years. I want to say, maybe twice in a year would be a lot for me to
Hmm.
bomb.
Yeah.
Um, but in my opinion, well, now that I do the poker thing, I'm like, is that the equivalent of me always min cashing? And if I'm always min cashing, I'm probably making some mistakes. It might not be luck that I'm min cashing most of the time, and I'm only final tabling a small percentage of the time. Or is that just the way that the variance is supposed to be? I don't
Yeah.
really know. That's something I certainly struggle with. To your point about like it's a bad crowd. I've done a bunch of shows recently that were like not very well organized or put together or were kind of set up to be a harder show than usual for the comedians.
Hmm.
And I've done just fine. But is
Yeah.
just fine good enough? Should I have crushed in that room? Am I deluding myself by saying like, "Oh, it was a small crowd. It was late. Everyone was already tired." These are things that, in my mind, if I were a killer comedian, I probably would have done better than pretty good on
Hmm.
those 2 nights. Who knows? I don't know.
Yeah.
Um, so all of those things, like you have to be really introspective and observe adequately. Uh, the outside world as well. It's difficult to. I tend to think that because I know I did just okay, that I'm not that deluded.
Hmm.
There are, I would say, the bell curve of comedians that is sort of like that they think that they either killed and are wrong, or they think that they did terribly and are wrong.
Hmm.
I don't know a lot of comedians who go, "That was just okay," when it was that accurately grade themselves, and I feel like I do grade myself because pretty accurate. If anything, I'm a little bit harder on myself. I think that I should be, but I definitely am not easy, and I'm not too difficult either. Otherwise, you quit, right?
Yeah.
Otherwise, you quit if you're just like way back to your original question, like if you think that you're not getting any better and that it's all not your fault, you should quit.
Right. Because you're being a victim at that point. Right.
Right, and also it just means that like the luck the luck isn't evening out. Like
Yeah.
I mean, it's not going to. even out. So unless you're happy with where you are, it's time for you to go. And I've had that conversation with myself before. I've had that conversation where I've said, look, if we don't advance in some way, some discernible way in the next 6 months to a year, maybe we should, focus our efforts elsewhere. It's a huge tax
Yeah.
on me physically and emotionally, and it's cost me relationships and certainly financially. I don't. When a comedian, like, I'll be completely honest with you, I played Tahoe last weekend and I got paid $400 for the weekend,
Yeah.
and that's okay money for some people, right? There's some people that can live off of that. There are some comedians that have to live off of that.
Hmm.
But because I don't, I spent $1,000 on that trip to Tahoe. I spent, 250, $300 on flights, which I changed like 2 or 3 times. So that was about $500. The
Hmm.
hotel was paid for. But then I probably just pissed around $500 while I was in Tahoe,
Yeah.
making like a little vacation out of it. So if I were truly a grinder comedian, I wouldn't be able to do that. I would be finding a couch to sleep on. I'd be taking a bus up there. Most comedians drive. Um, and I have the luxury to do that. But I do have to ask myself, like, hey, if next year you spend just as much money on this as you did last year, maybe it's time to start thinking about doing something else. But luckily, that's always happened. I've always found that next little rung of sort of things that for me keep me going, that allow me to think that I am advancing. I'm not just treading water.
I mean, one of the things that's interesting that you do is because I've watched you since Poker Night in America, and I always thought it was interesting that you could just take, and at times things would be very tense in a poker game, and you could really lighten it up with comedy. And I want to ask you, like, how do you do that? How do you take such a serious, well, what can be a serious situation, and find the funny in it, and all make it work in that situation? Because poker is an interesting game to talk about.
Well, one thing that I have to credit is, and it's not just on Poker Night in America, but it's on the European Poker Tour and it's
Yeah.
on the big game, is that I have people around me that save me from myself sometimes, right? What you're seeing, the output of me isn't 100% me. It's a lot of me, but there's
Yeah.
a whole team of people, right, working on this thing. And I can't tell you how many times that I've been asked, are you sure you want to say this? Or just
Yeah.
straight up, hey, this is a really tense moment. Maybe it can be a little levity, but maybe no, don't rain on it. Don't shed on it so much.
Yeah.
And I think that that's been helpful over the years, is to have someone on my shoulder, the angel on my shoulder, being like, hey, like, maybe let's give this a little bit more reverence.
Yeah.
But for the times where I do accomplish it, it really goes back to that initial thing of like, I just want to diffuse the situation. And by doing it, I get a little of the attention for myself.
Yeah.
And that's a major reason why I'm glad that I get saved from doing that, because I don't really want to make it about myself. That's why I hate doing winners interviews most of all. It's because they have to be quite serious. It's really hard to be funny in one, because why? If I'm funny, then I'm now making it about me.
Yeah.
And it's just, most of the time not appropriate. It's about the only time where you'll see me like almost go completely joke free, because, man, the last thing I want to do, especially if the joke works, I've just made it about me, and if the joke bombs, I've just really made it about me.
Yeah.
So that in that situation, it's not worth the risk. I just think that poker, the reason I started trying to be funny during poker broadcasts, or that was my goal all along, was because I think that unless you're at a certain level of player, some poker is very boring.
Hmm.
Now, it's not boring to the people who understand it, right?
Yeah.
Like, again, like a metaphor for this, but a way exaggerated one, is chess,
Yeah.
right? If you have no idea what's going on in chess, it's going to be boring for you. But there
Yeah.
might be a moment where you're still excited, right? When they're down to like 3 pieces, you don't
Right.
know what the hell's going on, but like this is something, whatever. I don't know chess.
Yeah.
Maybe they never get down to 3 pieces. You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So in poker, I was like, look, the people that are going to be irritated by humor in this moment are going to watch this no matter what.
Hmm.
But what I want is for someone who just tuned in, who maybe doesn't know that this is a serious moment and doesn't know what this moment really means. I'm gonna go, hey, I'm talking to you. It's still fun. It's still
Yeah.
fun. Hang out for a little bit.
Yeah.
Hey, come on, hang out for a little bit. And originally, and I'm glad this is changing, I wanted to be the guy that appealed to the wives and girlfriends.
Yeah.
I was like my um, sort of I'm tripping over my words because I want to make sure I word this correctly.
Yeah.
Back then, I thought that the only women watching poker were being forced to by their boyfriends and their husbands. Now, not only have I come to realize that there are plenty of women who like poker on their own, but also that, it's changed a lot too. That
Hmm.
statement is far less accurate and also more uncouth, but that was the original intent. And now it's just like, nah, I just want a casual viewer, whoever they may be, if they're passing by, that they hear something very silly and go, oh, what is this? Maybe I'll stick around for one more minute. Because how long do we really have to catch somebody to get them to watch something? Five
Right.
seconds, 10 seconds, maybe a little longer on television than on the
Yeah.
internet. But
Yeah.
that's it. That's all you get. And for me, again, humor is the best way to accomplish that.
Have there ever been moments where you said something that did bother a player? I mean, some of these players, obviously, some of them make a lot of money. They have egos. They're successful. They're good at the game. Like Helmuth, I mean, he's an excellent player, but he's known to be sensitive, right? So, has there ever been any moments where you've been like, "Oh, I shouldn't have said that," and then you kind of reap the repercussions of that?
There were definitely moments where I said I shouldn't have said that.
Yeah.
And and it was, those aren't the times that there were repercussions, I guess
Yeah.
is what I'm trying to say. I
Okay.
definitely regretted things. I was like, oh, I hope this doesn't become a thing. And luckily, I would say almost none of them became a thing. There
Yeah.
were things I didn't realize were going to hurt someone's feelings. Like, I'm going to say, okay, hold on a second. Let's reframe the question.
Okay.
There may have been hundreds or thousands of times I have upset someone.
Yeah.
The number of times that message has gotten back to me is so infrequent.
Hmm.
It is infinitesimally small. Like my batting average is 999, 999, compared to like the 5 complaints I've gotten over the years,
Yeah.
compared to the positive feedback that I've gotten, or non-complaints, I should say. Um, when it does happen, there have been times that a player just doesn't like me, doesn't
Hmm.
like my commentary, isn't amused by me, and that's okay. That's all right with me. Not everyone has to like me. The only time I ever got upset is when someone would choose to tag me in their criticism.
Hmm.
Um, unless you're a friend of mine, if you tweet like, I don't care for Joe Stapleton, I'm never going to see that. And I think it's perfectly reasonable for you to do.
Hmm.
That's what Twitter and whatever's for, right? It's for our opinions. So no big deal. Now, if you say, I don't really care for at Stapes, now I'm like, well, this becomes different than you just like saying something into the ether. Now this is you making sure that I know you have an
Yeah.
issue. So but that also mostly comes from straight up viewers, not necessarily poker players, but
Yeah.
occasionally a poker player has weighed in, and I've tried to handle it maturely. There's been a few times I straight up have. There was one player who told me he wanted to punch me in the face once and couldn't really put his finger on what he didn't like about me over the years, um, and other than the threat part, it's like I said, it's okay.
Yeah.
There was one time I said something that really upset Vanessa Selbst, and I felt bad about it because well, first of all, I didn't see how it should or could have upset her.
Hmm.
I'm not typically one of those people that is like, hey, come on, like this is what you're getting mad at, but I was like that in this particular case. But
Yeah.
really, what it always comes down to, no matter what, is if I've hurt your feelings, I'm sorry. I'm not trying to hurt your feelings. Even if I think you're being sensitive, I'm probably not going to say it.
Hmm.
I'm just going to go, oh, man, I wasn't trying to hurt your feelings. I'm sorry about that.
Yeah.
Um, I don't, it's not a non-apology because I am sorry I hurt the person's feelings. And the question is, if I had the chance to do it again, would I?
Yeah.
Right? That's the real question. And there's definitely been like stuff that people have complained occasionally to me about, like something in my act. And
Yeah.
I'll go, oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean for that to hurt you, with every intention of doing it again.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah.
again, those complaints are so infrequent that I'm not going to change my act just for one person's feelings getting hurt.
I mean, going along with that, I got to ask you too, because like I'm a fan of comedy and poker, and I'm old enough to have seen the evolution of comedy, and I feel like now people are more sensitive to so much. I think society in general is, and I think there's comedians that can that's fuel for them. Then there's
Yeah,
other comedians that feel like they have to tread the line, right? They have to be careful. And I don't like that because I feel like it dilutes the art, right? Where do you stand with that? I mean, are you the kind of comedian that likes to be subversive, to challenge the status quo, to say things that are a little off just to get that reaction? I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
sure. So for me, I like to be funny.
Yeah,
And I did at one point think that being subversive or challenging the status quo was the way to do that, to be edgy.
yeah.
I definitely have they called edge lord. I definitely have my edge lord moments. But I think one thing that I've realized is that being inclusive and staying away from a very small number of topics, let's be honest, like a very small number of topics and words um, that are not just considered offensive by like a few people, but by
Hmm.
lots of people, certain types of material, rape material, misogyny material, domestic abuse material. Like there are plenty of people who don't find that material funny, right?
Right.
Or in many cases, the comedians are doing that material aren't very good, and it makes it even worse.
Yeah.
I think that there are plenty of comedians that get away with doing plenty of stuff, but they're good comedians and they know what they're doing.
Hmm.
However, I would contend that avoiding those topics is challenging the status quo.
Right.
I think that it used to be challenging the status quo to talk about those things, and now being like, hey, let's be decent people. Unfortunately, like our status quo right now is like at a standstill, and I think part of the sensitivity comes from the culture wars in general.
Yeah.
That that both sides of the culture war, you've got people who are very sensitive and people who are like, I want to hurt your feelings.
Yeah.
um, you know, that I think makes people a little bit more sensitive. And I also think that uh, it's that people are, when they're sensitive on Twitter, when something blows up or someone gets dragged for something, especially if it's a comedy clip, that comedy clip isn't really meant to go into your house, into your home, into you in bed while you're scrolling late at night, right?
Yeah.
Like that comedy clip is not meant to be a clip at all. It's meant
Yeah.
to be performed in a club, on a stage, full of people who have consented and paid to be at a comedy club that night. And
Hmm.
so when that clip does totally fine that night in the comedy club, like I do a two bits in my act where I say gay.
Hmm.
Okay, it's
Hmm.
not anything hateful, but I just use the word gay.
Yeah.
Um, if that became a clip, I would be like, ugh, I don't really love that being a clip. It's going to get misconstrued. But in a comedy club, I've never had once even a groan, a complaint, anything from
Hmm.
anyone who's been there because they know what to expect in a comedy club.
Yeah.
So, that's part of it too. The sensitivity comes from this stuff is constantly in our eye and ear holes all the time without our
Right.
consent, really.
Yeah. That's interesting. That you think about it as it's a place, there's a time and a place for it, but it's being taken out of that, turned into a clip, and now everybody in the world can see it.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And the person may have pressed play on the clip or whatever, right? But
Yeah.
like they they didn't wake up that day and go, I'm going to sit down and watch this Bill and I can't wait to see this new Bill Burr clip and then press play and then complain about it.
Yeah.
Like that doesn't happen. It's always some person who gets told like, "Oh, you won't believe what this is," and then they watch it and they're and they
Yeah.
didn't go, "Oh, I can't wait to see some stand-up comedy today." They may have said, "I can't wait to be outraged," but it does make a difference. I think that you're how much you have consented to this material.
Do you think there's some people who understand? Like, I'm the kind of person who can go and watch and listen to a joke, no matter how offensive it is, and I can go, this is a stand-up comedy show. This is a show." Then there are some of the people that think, no, this is really how this person is, and they're really saying this because they're just a jerk. Like, do you think there's some people that can't delineate between the show and reality in some
Well,
way?
I mean, of course, yes, but
Yeah.
also stand-up comedy is like really the only stand-up comedy, I guess podcasting now too. I won't limit it, but like
Yeah.
let's say it's stand-up comedy, you are playing yourself, right?
Right.
You are pretending to be you.
Yeah.
And um in some cases, the comedian turns out to be the shitty person that they're joking about.
Yeah.
It's not always an act. So it is a difficult thing, I think, for the audience to balance. Like, I'll tell you, I'm a professional comedian, been a lot of comedy shows in my life. And when I'm
Yeah.
sitting there and there's a very pretty girl on stage and she talks about how hard it is being single and God, how she wishes she could meet this guy. And I'm thinking to myself, maybe I should talk to her after the show. Because
Yeah.
the thing is, that's what we write. We write that was true at some point.
Yeah.
That bit was true. It may not be now. But like, so it's. I think it's asking a lot of the audience to separate the art from the artists,
Yeah.
um, especially because like there's no one up there who's like doing super offensive material who is behind the scenes actually like working toward those marginalized groups, right?
Right.
Like
Right.
it's just never like that. And again, unfortunately, because our words are amplified so much now, right?
Yeah.
They're amplified so much that it used to be again that if you say like if you said something about like I don't know, I'm trying to think of an offensive word I can use as an example, but like without spelling. Anyway, think of an
Yeah.
offensive word about in a group, right? The
Yeah.
F word, the N word, right?
Yeah.
If you said that in a comedy club, 19 people would know about it. 150 people would know about it, right? And they
Yeah.
could all leave thinking you're a bad person. But again, because of the how these clips permeate now the whole world is going to think you're a bad person, which is fine, right? Words have consequences. But what I
Yeah.
mean is the damage, like those, maybe out of those 150 people, like 10 of their days got ruined.
Mm-hmm.
And now you can ruin 10 million
Yeah.
people's day without really intending to, right? You may
Yeah.
have known you were going to risk ruining those 150, but now you've risked ruining the day of a whole bunch of other people. So again, it's like, that I always say that like words now are kind of like what when we're like guns,
Yeah.
right? Like when especially our Constitution was written, right? Like the most powerful your gun could be was a musket, and the most powerful your words could be was like a printing press,
Yeah.
right? That's as much reach as you had. And now we have machine guns, and we have machine guns for words too, like that
Yeah.
you can just get your words out to millions of people in a matter of seconds. So those are things that like when we talk about how wise the founding fathers were, I don't think they could have realized that just how powerful words would be and how powerful would be as well.
I know. Just imagine what they would have thought of like X or Twitter or
Exactly.
they
You know
wouldn't
what I
they would have no
mean? Like
clue what that's
they
like.
might
Yeah.
have thought a little harder about some stuff. I mean, who
Right.
knows?
Yeah. If you could pick, your dream gig, whether it's commentating or, performing, and if it wasn't poker, what would it be? Because I could only imagine you like commentating the Super Bowl or the World Series. Or if you could pick something, what would it be for you?
Those sound really cool.
Yeah.
I guess I was aiming a little bit higher even than you were
Yeah.
throwing me there. Like I want to host the Tonight Show.
Yeah.
I want to sit on the couch. I want to talk to celebrities. I want to do skits.
Yeah.
I'm a little old for Saturday Night Live at this point, but
Yeah.
at the last anniversary, when I watched all that footage, the 40th of all the footage of people auditioning and their stories of getting on the show, it was maybe like the first time I'd ever really had regret in my life that I never actually went for that. I never tried it. I was lying to myself for a long time. I didn't admit to myself that I wanted to be a performer until I was like more or less offered the big game,
Hmm.
which was like back in 2009. I was like 7 years into Hollywood, 8 years into Hollywood, when because I was like, oh, acting is stupid. Being in front of the cameras for idiots and bozos and narcissists, but writing is noble. So I was trying to be a writer
Hmm.
at first, and it wasn't until later on that I admitted it. So yeah, I'd like to host the Tonight Show. I mean, look, to be on the big stage of any big sporting event is fine. I think that my fit's not right for the Super Bowl. I don't think
Hmm.
they need like I would just really piss off sports fans.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but something like a Holy Moly or a Wipeout, or what do they call it, Bonsai, those
Hmm.
types of shows I think would be really fun to do.
Yeah.
um I would love to do um like an at midnight is like kind of cool.
Hmm.
Game show. I'm pitching a game show around town right now. I think that if we sold it, they would want a big star,
Hmm.
but that kind of thing. I don't know that I really am pretty good on my feet. I like interacting with people. Um, and I just love the sort of when I talk about like Holy Moly or Bonsai, like the sort of the in poker, my what I the tree I have to pick from is pretty I want to say barren, but
Hmm.
sparse, right?
Yeah.
It's not a plentiful fruit. There's only so much I can work with, and sometimes I get told, "Oh, don't make fun of their shirt or their name," and I'm like, "Ah, it doesn't leave me a lot." Um,
Right.
so, um, but so like on something like a Holy Moly or whatever, like you're like, "Oh wow, look at all the new jokes that I would have to work with.
Right.
How many more puns, how many more sort of references I can make and do it all over again." So just to be able to do so similar to what I do, just in a different sort of environment. Bowling, I would love to do bowling
Oh,
commentary.
bowling would be
Seems really
great for
fun.
you, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, and I used to bowl as a young man, so I've
Yeah.
got a little background there. So that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I want to ask you too, like people that are trying to get into comedy. And I see it more and more every day. I see new comedians popping up every day. I think it's because of YouTube and streaming and everything. What's your advice? I mean, because I'll be honest with you. Like I've written some material. I've never performed it. I used to play music. I have no problem being on stage with music, but the thought of going on stage alone, I think for most people, and being the one person everybody's looking at, and feeling the pressure of I have to entertain,
Yeah.
it scares the hell out of me.
It's not
So
just the pressure of having to entertain, because maybe you could even do a solo musical act, but
yeah,
it's
but
it's it's the knowing that if you're out stage as a musician, there are many ways for the audience to show that they are enjoying themselves.
yeah,
And there are many ways for them to not be enjoying themselves that you would never know the difference.
right,
And with comedy, you pretty much know exactly if they're enjoying themselves or not. You get instant feedback, and
yeah,
that's what makes it so scary.
yeah,
Is that if they're not enjoying themselves, you'll know it, and if they you will know it by their lack of response too. So that's
right,
really terrifying to know that you have to make them do something
right.
is really scary. Um, so advice for comedians would be this: if you can, try to get on television first. That makes it a lot easier.
So much easier. Yeah.
So much easier. So, man, I don't know if I'm the best person to give advice for just the reason that I'm old, and all I can do is say like what I see other comedians do who are killing it right now.
Hmm.
One is to perform every single day.
Wow.
This can only happen in a handful of cities around the world. If you can't do it every day, do it 5 days a week, 5 nights. If you go to New York City, you can perform 7 nights a week, 6 shows a night. That's really what it takes.
Hmm.
Two is to, when you're not doing stand-up comedy at night, write during the day and put out dumb skits.
Hmm.
Uh, it helps if they're good, but not always. Like, I see plenty of people succeeding. The algorithm picks you up. Maybe what you did at the beginning, you'll get better as you go.
Yeah.
Two, three, perfection is the enemy of good. So you will, if you're waiting, Ryan, to go do stand up for your first time, you're like, my set's not just ready yet. My set's not just ready yet. It never will be.
So you got to go do it. You just have to do it.
You gotta do it. You gotta do it. You gotta fail a lot. You gotta get better. You gotta learn from it.
Yeah.
Um, but to have a constant online presence, be doing jokes on Twitter, be doing posting sketches. As soon as your clips start getting good, post your clips.
Yeah.
These are all things I don't do, by the way. These are all things I don't do. I'd probably be further along if I did. I have my own reasons for not
Right.
doing them. But that appears to be what it takes these days. I would
Yeah.
say go to as many shows as you can. If you can afford it, go to the shows and buy the comics a drink, buy the promoter a drink, buy the host a drink. And then they're gonna go, "What do you do?" And you're gonna go, "I'm a stand-up comedian." They're gonna go, "You know what? Thanks for the drink. I got a show I run here on Mondays. Why don't you come by sometime?" That sort of thing. If you can afford it, which is difficult. If you're a comedian, if you're doing sketches during the day and comedy at night, how are you gonna afford to pay for this stuff? I don't know. Like I said, try being on TV first. Try having rich parents.
Yeah.
That seems to work out for a lot of other people.
Yeah. That's very easy to do. Yeah. As we wrap this up, I've got to ask you, Joe, about your tchotchkes. You have a lot of tchotchkes behind you. Um, I see, it looks like something from Mad TV. You worked on Mad TV for a while. Were you writing there or?
Thank you for the question. Yes, no, I was a production assistant at Mad TV,
Okay.
and then I became a production coordinator, and I did that for the next few years, which was, awesome at the time. It was a union job. I was like 23 years old, making
Yeah.
60 grand a year in 2004. So that was really cool. But it did stop me. I'd say stop me. It made it a lot easier for me to not pursue any other sorts of dreams because I was working hard, making good money, partying on the weekends, wasn't really writing, wasn't really trying to perform. So
Yeah.
it did hold me back in some ways. But yes, okay. So some of these tchotchkes are, I just loved collecting movie paraphernalia and shit for a really long time. And I've kind of tapered off now because I realize that stuff actually just kind of holds you down.
Yeah.
Um, but I got Nakatomi Plaza over there
Oh, is that a model of it?
up on top. On the other side, I've
Wow.
got Ash from the Evil Dead.
Oh,
Uh, Over here, almost right here. Boom. Do you see that right there? That white box?
yes.
You see that with, like there might be writing on it?
Yeah.
That's a copy of Dirty Work signed by Norm Macdonald. No, wait, that's the one that Artie Lang signed. Never mind. That's Artie Lang. Um, uh, this is the comic book I wrote during the pandemic. We finally got it published. I know the
Wow.
cellophane shouldn't be on it, but it's a one of. We only printed 5 of this type of cover, and mine is the one of one. Let's see what else have I got back there. V for Vendetta. Whoops,
Hmm.
that's on that side. Los Pollos Hermanos up over there from Breaking Bad. Just I don't know. I loved movies and TV shows so much that I just came here with such an adoration for that stuff. So I just always, if it's something was a movie was like really important to me, I would want to have some kind of memorabilia from it also.
Yeah. It's so funny you bring up Mad TV because my sister lived in LA. She worked on Mad TV for a little while. She lives out here in Vegas now, but
Wait,
she
is her
may
name
have been,
Jen?
no, her name's Vinay. Like it's like
Vinay.
Renee with a V, but I think she may have been on there working on that show at the same time you may have been,
I
which is
don't
funny.
remember a Vinay, but what department was she in?
She was like doing extra work, so she was working in skits as
Okay,
sort of an
so I
extra.
might not have. So I every single person on the cast and crew would have been in front of my eyesight for
Yeah,
most of it, but not necessarily extras because those folks were handled by a different department and hired by somebody else. So it's
right.
entirely possible. If you know anything about, I worked on Mad TV from seasons 8 through 14,
Hmm.
the latter half.
Okay.
So, and that was from about 2000, summer 2002 to about summer 2009.
Okay.
So if you want to, that show became very. I wasn't a huge fan before because I was such a big SNL fan. I wasn't a
Yeah.
huge fan when I got there because it was the SNL competition or whatever. But over the years, I grew to be rather fond of the show, and I started working there when I was 20 years old. So when it got canceled at 27, like that was my family. Like that was
Yeah.
like a third of my life had been spent working on that show.
Right. Right. There's a lot of talent on that show. It was great. I remember watching a lot of it. So, um, well, as we wrap up, Joe, I got to ask you, you're doing a lot right now. I think you wrote a book and you're also working on you have another podcast too, right? So tell us about
Yes, I have a
what you're doing right
podcast.
now.
We talked about the book. It's called Trapped.
Hmm.
It's a graphic novel loosely based on my life. It's about a TV poker commentator who thinks he should be a little bit more famous and
Okay.
ends up getting his mouth gets him into some trouble
Yeah.
and his mouth gets him out of some trouble. So that is that book. Yes, my podcast is called Poker in the Ears. It's the official Poker Stars podcast. So, it's basically meant to be a behind the scenes of the various TV shows, tour stops, that sort of thing. If you're interested in like keeping up with mostly the European circuit,
Yeah.
That's our beat, the European Poker Tour. So we talk about how to satellite into events, and we play games, and we have like kind of an entertainment bent to it. Like I will try, if there's anyone that in the entertainment that does something remotely poker related, like we had Michael Cera on because he played Player X in Molly's game, and we had John Hamm on because I know he likes to play poker.
Yeah.
Aaron Sorkin we had on again because of Molly's game. So we try to have either someone that has made poker art, or someone who I know is an artist but who is very into poker. So, and we obviously have the big names in professional poker on as well. We just had Jason Kuhn on last week. I don't know if that means anything to any of y'all, but we talked to the heavy hitters as well. We've had Helmuth on. Helmuth blocked me on Twitter for a while. Couldn't remember why he did it. But I meant to bring that up earlier when you were asking about offending people. I'd said something to him that pissed him off, or liked a tweet that pissed him off. I don't know. We're cool.
Yeah.
But he had blocked me for a while.
Wow. That's so Helmuth.
Yeah.
Well, Joe, it's been great. If people want to listen to the podcast, check out the book, how can they find out more about you, or tune in, or buy the book? Where do they go?
Sure. The book is at twistedcomics.co.uk. Really, everything is probably on my website. Also, I'm very accessible on Twitter and Facebook. As you know, Ryan, you just said, hey, want to come on my podcast? I said, yeah sure. So I'm both on Facebook, Instagram, I'm InstaStapes. On Twitter, I am at Stapes. And I own the domain joestapleton.com. I couldn't get joestapleton.com, so I have joestapleton.com, all spelled out, .com.
So there's two .coms after your name.
Well, no, there's just one .com, but one of them is joestapleton.com, all one word.
Got it.
.com.
Got it. joestapleton.com.
Boom.
First .com is spelled .com.
That's right.
Got it. Well, Joe, it's been great. Thank you for being on the show. Let's keep in touch. Any shows coming up you want to promote, or anything you're doing?
Yeah, sure. I mean, on February 28th, I've got a show at the Kookaburra Lounge in Hollywood, California, right at the Hollywood and Highland Center. Great space. And anyone who comes to the show and mentions this podcast, I will buy you a shot.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
This is February 28th, you said?
February 28th, Friday, February 28th, the Kookaburra Lounge. Again, if you just hit me up for a ticket link at any of those places, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, I will happily send the ticket link along.
If you're ever playing in Vegas, let me know. I'd love to come and check out a show for sure.
I will most certainly have a Vegas at some point between now and the end of July.
Okay. Sounds
at least
good.
One. April 5th, I'm thinking maybe I might have one, so keep that date in mind.
I will. Okay. Joe Stapleton, thank you. It's been a great conversation, and I look forward to keeping in touch with you and all the things you're doing. I'll keep a lookout for everything you're doing. And if you're listening, pick up the book, go to see Joe live, listen to the podcast, and it's been great, Joe. Thank you.
A pleasure, Ryan.
Hey, this is Ryan with the Business Stories Podcast, and I want to let you know that we are looking for sponsors for episodes. If you have a company that wants to sponsor an episode, please reach out to me at livingryan@gmail.com. And thanks again for listening.